All right, everyone, it's time to talk a little bit about moral panic and why I can guarantee you take heart and just keep persisting and be optimistic long term. The censorship lovers that we see right now that are dogpiling every other website and they're trying to deplatform people, usually on spurious charges, they will lose. Historically speaking, if we look back at every prior moral panic, the same thing remarkably happens every single fucking time. It often has to do with changes in like technology and culture. The older generations get like scared and stuff. But here's how it works. Here's why these moral panics happen, like the InfoWars panic we're in, which is subjugated to the right-wing panic that we see. What happens is that a bunch of people who make money, they feel endangered. Right now, the legacy media is dying. Cable news, newsprint, those groups are beginning to die off. They're under great stress right now, just financially, not even just socially. The politics have changed within the United States and the West. Populism has come back. So naturally, people who are further left, they're under a great deal of stress, and they make a lot of money by being in office. It's harder for them to do that now. Them, and also to some extent, big tech, they're sort of the middleman in this current moral panic. These groups are very much like, say, the pulp paper manufacturers and oil industries of the Reefer Madness era, or the televangelists of the late 70s through the Satanic Panic, or the dying tradcon sort of government during the Red Scare that sought to justify itself based on basically McCarthyism, going after the commies, the generic anybody who is not one of us must be a communist agent. Now, first and foremost, in every single moral panic, whether it's a general moral panic or a subjugate element, like Elvis's hips being shaken around, being subjugated to the Red Scare. Of course, that's its own, hey, our daughters will have impure thoughts sort of thing. Every single time that a moral panic develops, it follows the exact same trajectory. The timeline may be different. It may be larger or smaller in scope, but it follows more or less the same exact trajectory. We're getting towards the end point of our current moral panic, if this is any indicator, by the way, in the next 2 or 3 years, I would say. Every single time, a very real potential problem is co-opted by groups that are under, usually, fiscal stress, a political movement, a corporation, whatever it happens to be. They then will use their influence to stoke fear in mainstream America or mainstream wherever it happens to be. Something has gone wrong, middle America. Hey, mom and pop, little Jimmy hippies will give him acid. Elvis is going to cause your daughter to lose her virginity before marriage. Big problem, by the way. It's losing virginity to Elvis, a huge problem. Even though I think he was bisexual, he was almost asexual, which is funny. Did he have a kid? I don't even know. The temperance era. Hey, your child will be a drunk. Your child will not work hard enough. Every single time that these moral panics develop, a kernel of truth is taken up and amplified by orders of magnitude by spurious groups that then create pitchfork-waving mobs and send them off to do their bidding. Now, they're always successful, for the most part, in generating the mob. The mob eventually collapses after a number of years. Why does it collapse? 2 important reasons. The first is the vulnerability of those who end up becoming leaders. That is, you always get people who rise to the top within that mob and sort of begin speaking for people. The problem is people who tend to rise to the top tend to be unsavory. Because in order to rise to the top within any socio-political situation, you usually have to be a cutthroat. You are a flawed, potentially psychotic individual. Politicians are like this, business leaders. This happens all the time within business. It happens all the time within government. We say government power tends to corrupt. Do you think it's any different within the pitchfork-waving mob as long as there's a profit to be made or a name to be made? Of course it works the same way. A lot of those televangelists from the Satanic Panic era eventually were outed as pedophiles or rapists. A lot of the McCarthyists were eventually outed as having all sorts of weird proclivities. Eventually, the people who were screaming about how evil and corrupt the Beatles were, they were the ones that were evil and corrupt. It was like mommy's little secret. During the Prohibition era, the people that were rambling about how bad alcohol was, in some cases, they were the mafia heads that wanted to brew the alcohol and make the money themselves. It was profit motive. Profit and power always plays a role. That's number one, the vulnerability of their leaders. The people who become symbols of these movements tend to be seriously flawed. Eventually, their enemies target that fact by default, the movement falls apart. Number two, they become unstable because of their size. It becomes impossible to control the mob. That is, the masters of the mob eventually no longer are really capable of governing its movements, and they sort of wander off and destroy everything in their path for a while, and then, subsequently, the generation changes. The soccer moms, their kids grow up, they go off, they're no longer as panicked as they were before. The new generation rises up, gets active within society and politics. It's not taken in by the same kind of propaganda. It's about a 5 to 10 year generally span. Now, sometimes it's longer, and sometimes it's part of a larger problem. Like the Red Scare is not in a vacuum. It's coupled with a continuous Cold War mentality that lasted for half a century. But in the microcosmic sense of it being its own unit, it failed by the middle of the 60s. Things that had before been unacceptable because they were likened to communism became accepted. Rock music, for example, at first it's a subversive, again, impure thoughts in our daughters, our sons are doing the jitterbug and shit. I mean, it's terrible. It will corrupt people, it's degenerated, it's a bad thing, it'll cause crime, it'll cause harm, it'll cause violence. The kernel of truth is always very, very small. It's like with the hippie era, the hippie scare. They were telling people, hey, the hippies are growing more numerous. They're going to come to your town and give your kids drugs. They overdose all the time. They'll kill people, and a massive crime, rape and murder all the time. Everything will fall apart. We are succumbing to a sort of evil degeneracy from Russia, basically, is the justification for trying to crack down on their music and on their style and stereotyping and declaring that if you don't look like Leave It to Beaver, you must be a secret hippie too. The kernel of truth was, yeah, a few hippies did murder people. A few hippies did overdose and die in the alleyway, and then some of them were itinerant and sort of homeless and just wandered around and caused trouble and left trash in their wake. Largely, though, that didn't happen. It was never a real problem. McCarthyism, there were communists in Hollywood. There were communists in Congress, but they weren't numerous and they never had any real power. The sort of Rosenberg mentality largely had already passed by. It was largely a witch hunt. That is exactly what we see today with the internet. The kernel of truth, I'll lay it out for you and sort of compare it. The corporate group, the for-profit, very, very scurrilous sort of group that's causing the moral panic, that is the legacy media that is under stress because the alt media, largely on the internet, is out competing it. They are being replaced by us. That makes them mad and it makes them scared. So they're lashing out. Number two, to an extent, only to an extent, big tech. The big tech firms realize that is a compatriot situation because they're looking at alt tech and saying, people are beginning to innovate things that we never thought to implement. We're monopolies, we're big corporations, we don't want to lose our audiences. Unfortunately, I think that they're making the wrong decision by standing with the legacy media. And the third are craftivists. That is the craftivistic, politically motivated groups that need bigotry. They need people to be afraid of hate. They need people to be afraid that there are armies of secret Nazis out there, or they can't justify the donations they get. They want money, they want power, they want notoriety and fame. Everyone wants to rule the world. Power tends to corrupt. These groups then have created a pitchfork-waving mob that is none the wiser. See, the reason why the average person that's part of this deplatforming pro-censorship witch hunt is part of that isn't because they want to maintain corporate profits. When you try to tell them, hey, big corporations are causing this, that's not the reason they're part of the mob. They see it as a moral issue and a political issue, a sub-political issue. Some of these people are genuinely worried their kids are going to be indoctrinated if they go to the Renaissance Fair. It's fantastically, obviously stupid, but they have been fooled. They are victims of corporate propaganda. But try telling them that and see how far you get. 1 in 100 times you might actually be partially successful. They're victims of propaganda. So then you have the mob. That mob has been growing. It is lashing out more and more. It is picking on bigger and bigger targets. At some point, it will inevitably collapse because it represents a dying paradigm. It's specifically this particular moral panic is more like the major moral panics of time than the minor ones. Something that's smaller, it's like it doesn't matter as much, doesn't have to be part of paradigm shift. It can be a really short 6 months or a year goes by, like the ecstasy scare, subjugated to the drug war. I can remember that mid-late 90s. They had some drug commercials and some news reports. Salvia was a big thing. Mid-2000s, we're talking, I think, 2006 through 08 or so. Salvia was used as a boogeyman to prop up the drug war. It was subjugated to an existing moral panic-derived system, sort of like a prohibition. It was just a justification. Government is often involved. I am telling you that over the next couple of years, inevitably, people who are siding with this moral panic and who are acting like they are objectively right and they control everything and they're right forever and they should have leeway to do whatever they want will inevitably be remembered as the goofballs they are. People will look back a half century from now at this current era, and they're going to look at people like me and people like you as being victimized by people like them, the moralists, the authoritarians, saying, there's a problem. The internet's full of bad things. We have to censor everything, and we're going to let big corporations do that because, we're supposedly liberal. They will be remembered no differently from how we remember the temperance era proponents, the eugenicists who thought that humankind was evolving backwards because too many poor people were having sex. They'll be remembered no differently from the reefer madness propagandists or people who said acid would make you stare at the sun until your eyes popped out. No different. No different from people who burned Beatles records because they thought John Lennon would make their kids atheistic. No different from people who looked at Elvis swinging his hips around, they worried about their teenage daughters having nighttime emissions, and they decided to turn the TV off. No different, by the way, from people who went after people like this during the Satanic Panic. Oh, he's a goth. Oh my God, he's also bisexual. So, he must be a Satanist and shit. It's no different, dude. The grunge rock, another microcosm. Kurt Cobain, oh my God, my kid might rebel. I might find him with spray paint under his bed. He might smoke marijuana. Oh my God, it's a terrible time. It's the same fucking shit over and over again. It comes from the right and the left because it inevitably involves corporate endeavors. So when some of these people, they think that they're fighting for the good guys, they're helping deplatform. Hey, no, you're not. You're helping to prop up corporate profits and you're being used as a pawn. You will not be remembered fondly. It is inevitable that you will be largely forgotten. If you're remembered at all, and you're on that side of the struggle, you'll be remembered as an evildoer, as a villain. You'll be like Joe McCarthy. Or you'll be like you will be a Hollywood stereotype trope. You will be that millennial that actually thought that panic was real, who was actually that out of touch that they thought the internet would bring the republic crashing down and that Russia and Nazis were everywhere. That every independent commentator needed to be censored because they had bad things to say. You will be that person who was panicky and jumpy and ultimately a total cringelord. That's how you'll be remembered. I can guarantee you. It won't even take that long, dude. I probably won't even have gray hair, and that'll have already come to pass. Meanwhile, the people actually creating content that have to deal with your bullshit, we're going to sit there laughing. It's going to be funny to us because we're going to be remembered. When Paul Joseph Watson a couple years ago sort of coined the moniker of the modern-day counterculture, he was fundamentally correct. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that we're a bunch of hippies and some of us have long hair. True. More of them have fashy haircut or whatever. I think that's stupid myself. But no, we'll be remembered much more fondly than the people that we're ideologically fighting against. You represent multi-billion-dollar corporations. You think globalism is wonderful and that people are hateful if they oppose it. That's nonsense, dude. That's literally an inversion of the prior paradigm being used by a dying political party, a dying political movement, neoliberalism. It's being ripped apart by the progressives, let alone the new right. It's being ripped apart by its own party members more than it is the populist Trumpites or anything. A dying political paradigm. Old legacy media corporations that no longer are fun to listen to. Newsprint's dying. Radio terrestrially is dying. Cable is dying. Old technology. They're all in cahoots to try to maintain their money and their power. It's not even politically motivated. It's always been motivated by money. Do you think that some country star wanted to compete with Elvis Presley? No, half the censorship of people like Elvis or the Beatles came from other people within the fucking music industry. It didn't even... I don't want to be part of your record label anymore because you have these evil, degenerate commies making music with you. It's all about money, dude. That's all it will ever be about. Money, and paired with that power, the paradigm is going to crash down on their heads. It's just a matter of when. When it does, I'm going to laugh. You watch what happens. Can't wait till it happens. Once that change is in the air... and it begins, it'll move very, very quickly. The Satanic Panic culminated. Nicholas Schreck is like a modern-day prophet. Back in the mid-'80s. First time he was talking to Bob Larson. Bob Larson said, well, you say, Satan this, Satan that, paganism this and that, occultism, but, church attendance is way up. Oh, the churches are growing, churches, mega churches everywhere. And then Nicholas Schreck pointed something out that is proven to be prophetic over and over. He obviously understands history, understands synchronicity and memetics to some degree, as the occultist that he, I believe, in many ways still is. He said, yeah, of course, it's always darkest before dawn, basically. They're growing because they're playing the devil's game. They've cheapened themselves. They're part of this satanic panic, which they were at the time. They're branding themselves in a very corporatized way in order to gobble up audience, and they are weakening themselves. The actual spirituality went out the window. They became for-profit business entities. They sold people lies, and eventually it crippled them. They ended up going to mega churches. They're no longer a dynamic force within the U.S. The evangelocons died out in the late 90s. They didn't even last a decade and a half before they were virtually wiped off the face of the earth. Their voting bloc still shrinks to this day. The neoliberals will suffer the same fate. The legacy media will suffer the same fate. And pretty soon, the legacy media, like cable news and things, and legacy entertainment, they will be in the dustbin of history as a relic of a former era. It'll be like Victrola records or something. It'll be no different. Look, those were all in vogue. Everyone wanted the Victrola. Everyone wanted these. Wow, it's so cool, man. It plays music. It has this little horn on top. The electricity is great. It'll be like in the old style incandescent bulbs. It'll be like anything that has ever been very dominant for a while and then totally forsaken. Oh, the horse and buggy. It's just a wonderful way to travel. Oh, what's this automobile thing? Or a Stanley steamer. The Model T for the early wave of cars that had like no shock absorbers and no heating system. It'd be like a crank-powered vehicle. That's exactly what the New York Times and CNN represent at this point. They are dying, they're terrified, and so they're lashing out. So be optimistic. We have to keep persisting. We have to keep fighting ideologically, and we need to let anyone who's still on the fence know that they are wrong. They're totally wrong, and they're lying to everybody because they want money. That's all it's ever been about. That's about all. Peace out.